So, hi everybody. Welcome to Brunch with Boston Buddies. Today is Monday, April 27th. Today we have with us special guest, Bob Hodge, 1979 third place Boston Marathon winner, but also Greater Boston Track Club athlete, coached by Bill Squires, friends with all the big names and everybody else associated with Boston, and a Boston legend himself. So welcome, Bob. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, I always ask before we start these interviews how you're doing during these times, these crazy times that we're going through.
Yes, well, just trying to keep some normalcy, and my family, we've been blessed so far, and everyone's healthy.
That's
so,
good.
There's just so much uncertainty, but I can go out for a run, and that helps. So just being able to get out, it's springtime now in New England, and everything's kind of throwing out and looking beautiful. So you just try to keep your mind occupied, and we're going to get through it. It's just the uncertainty can be a little unnerving.
Right. That's just it. Yeah, it is a beautiful time to be in New England. Spring is always nice, especially Boston area.
Yeah. The weather is a bit schizophrenic. We had 65-degree day on Saturday, and today it's 40 and raining and windy, and we might get some snow tonight. So that's April in the Boston area.
I think we had every single season last year on Marathon Day.
Yes. It's incredible. I think we were talking about Yuki the other day, and that 2018 race was, I think, the worst conditions that I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I mean, extreme heat is really bad, but the wind that day was just in the rain, and it was amazing.
Yeah, we had a lot of people.
But, the runners did what they usually do. They just went out and dealt with it, and it was really an amazing day. I was glad to be home having a cup of tea, watching it on television.
I ran it that day.
Oh my goodness!
You know what? I'm happy I did. It's like I've said to other people. It's one of those things where, you go through something that's difficult and you come out on the other side, and then the people that you did it with, you're bonded with them for life.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I didn't understand on television. You really didn't get the feel for how bad the wind was. But then I saw a few shots at the finish line from the side, and it showed how severe it was, and the rain going sideways. And that was a tough one.
Especially, it was especially tough once you hit Boston. Outside of Boston,
Yuki and Desi are two of my favorite athletes, and of course, they won that day because they're all guts, they're all toughness, and they knew how to run on a day like that.
Right.
Yuki ran a brilliant race. I thought he would be in the top 10. I thought he'd have a great finish, but I wouldn't have picked him to win. But when I saw the weather that day, I said, I like Yuki's chances today.
Right. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing with Des. You know what I mean? She's like a tough runner.
Yes, exactly.
She's
exactly
for those conditions. Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that was a great day. It's just all around. I didn't find it horrible, to tell you the truth, because like outside of Boston, I was in the pack. You know what I mean? I'm not out in the lead with the leaders where you're by yourself. In the pack, you stay in the middle. You let everybody around you block the wind, and it really wasn't that horrible.
There's some advantages there.
Right.
Right.
But you have a book out as well right now that we wanted to talk about.
The book's called Tales of the Times.
Yep.
And it's about my own running career. It's really a book about growing up. Obviously, it's more, the audience would be more runners, but honestly, I didn't have an audience when I wrote it. I've been writing for a long time, and it's really a lot of individual stories that I wrote that got cobbled together to make a book. And it was published by Barb's Beer Foundation.
Right.
Tom Murphy has published 2 other books under this umbrella. Bob's Beer Foundation raises money for lung cancer. His wife died from lung cancer. She was a runner. He's a runner. So he had read some of my stories that I'd shared. Some of the stories were published in New England Runner, on people's blogs, and elsewhere.
Right.
And so he really shepherded this thing along. I would hope to have done a book at some point in my life, but I wasn't really planning to do it right now.
Okay.
But now it's done and it's out there, and so I'm pretty happy with it. It has a few faults. You're always looking at things that you did that you wish you had done differently.
Yep.
But in the end, for the time and energy that I had to put into it, I'm happy with it, and I gotten so much good feedback. And it was really just it was like a letter to my friends and family. This is a part of my life that is way behind me now, because this book finishes in 1989, and I'm only like 32 years old, so 33 years old, and now I'm 65. So it's a time to kind of look back, take stock, and then just share these things with your friends.
Right, and it's a lot of short stories.
Yeah, 44 stories. They're all between 500 and 1,500 words.
Right, but it talks about your exploits just growing up as a kid, your paper route,
Yes.
your Boston experiences. You were coached by Billy Squires and college. It really it's great little short anecdotes, and I've enjoyed it.
In the beginning, I didn't even have the stories chronologically. When they first started working on the editing, they said, well, you have to put this thing in some kind of order. And I said, well, I'd like to be unconventional and just put it out there.
Right.
But I think they do, the stories do kind of fit pretty well together chronologically. And in each short story, hopefully, you can read a lot more into it. The book is 218 pages. I tried to keep it short for my friends with a short attention span. So, and it's got lots of pictures. It has, I think, 30 pictures in it. So, but I'm happy with it. I'm happy with the experience. Obviously, I wish we got to do some of the book events that we had planned around the Boston Marathon. But we're doing okay. And it wasn't something, a money-making venture. It was really just, like I said, to share the stories.
Yeah. I've talked with a few of the people that and you ran with, Ron Tabb being one of them. He was on the show on Friday, and everybody that I talked to was like, oh, he's a great writer. He's a great writer. You got to get his book. Everybody always talks about your writing.
That's nice to hear. I have shared a lot of versions of these stories with my Facebook friends. Yep. Most of the people you mentioned being among them, Larry Rossin and Ron Tabb.
Yep.
And Paul. So yes. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's good.
So yeah, maybe we can go through a couple of these the stories that you were talking about. Maybe what we do for us is we ask people to do an intro video and why they started running. What made you start running? Maybe do you want to give us a little background into that and your first race?
Yeah, well, that was my first story, is my first race, and it was cross country. I was in high school, my freshman year. We all had mandatory phys ed class, and the instructor just saw me running during baseball game and said, you should go out for the track team. And there was another kid in my phys ed class, and he was already on the cross country team. So I went out to the stadium with him and met the coach, and it just started that way. I mean, I liked the coach right away. I think I ran only 2 workouts before going to my first meet, which was at Franklin Park in Boston. We got on a bus, and it was a big adventure. And I just liked it more than baseball. Baseball was always my game growing up.
Yeah.
But when I got into high school, it was kind of accidental to get into it, but it seemed to fit me like a glove. My first race, I just enjoyed it so much. I was so excited. And so just took off from there, and it's been part of my life ever since.
Are you a Sox fan?
I used to be. I'm not really much of a baseball fan.
Okay.
So, but when I was a kid, it was just the opposite. But when I started running, it was the Red Sox and won the 67 pennant, the
Mhm.
impossible dream. I had all of those players' photos on my wall. But once I started running, those photos came down, and Jim Ryan's photo went up, and Abebe Bikila's photo went up there. So it was almost overnight that it was a sea change.
And you
And
actually now, and you ran with the people who have posters today, you know?
yeah, a lot of them. Yes, yes, yeah,
That's that's incredible.
yeah.
Um,
I mean, I'm still a big fan. I follow the sport, but I'm not directly involved in it. I did some coaching, college coaching,
mhm.
for a while. I thought coaching was going to be something that I would do, but I think I wasn't very good at it to come down to it.
Yeah.
And also, I worked in athletic shoe company, worked with New Balance and Reebok, um, and that wasn't really for me either. So I
Mhm.
wound up being a librarian in the end,
Yep.
and that's how things worked out.
Yep.
But I'm
Maybe.
still very close touch with athletics. I talk to a lot of younger athletes.
Mhm.
Can't run with them anymore because I'm much too slow. But yeah, still enjoy going. I go to the Olympic trials as a spectator, as a fan. I go
Mhm.
and meet a lot of old friends, and yeah, so it's a big part of my life.
Yeah. Now, 1979, though, you were third place finisher for Boston, correct?
Yes, I was running with Greater Boston Track Club. I
Mhm.
ran my first Boston in 1977,
Mhm.
and I ran a 2:28. I finished 46th place.
Mhm.
Not bad, but not what I was hoping for. So it took me 2 years before I ran it again. And in '79, I
Yep.
went from a 2:28 personal best to a 2:12 personal best. So I thought I was ready for a good time,
Mhm.
and you just never know. The marathon is kind of unknown event. It was only my second one, and my preparation for the first one really wasn't what it needed to be. So I had to learn from that experience.
Right. Now,
Yeah. But after my second one, then it put me among the best runners in the country. And then in the 1980 games were coming up. So I was really kind of overnight. I went from someone who was working hard at it to someone who kind of had to figure out, okay, how do I take it to the next level? And
Mhm.
you know, uh, so a lot of that is in my book. That's really what my book is about. It's
Yeah.
about the struggle with running. Back then, running was an amateur sport. It's a professional sport now, but it's kind of not at the same level as other professional sports are. And that's a rough deal, That's hard for athletes that are coming up who are on the verge of doing something great, but not good enough to say get a big time
Yeah.
uh, uh, contract or be invited to races like Boston,
Mhm.
uh, where you basically have to be a sub 210 runner to get an invite.
Mhm.
Uh, So my heart's with those people that are preparing to come up and trying to be amongst the best because they really don't get the support that they need.
Yeah.
And they actually never did. And a lot of that's in my book too.
It's a
A
strange
lot of the
sport.
struggles.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's the only sport I know where the amateurs compete with the professionals in the
right.
actual race, like
Yeah, yeah.
it's
At least in the marathon or in most events, you're right. Yeah,
right.
and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. But I think we're seeing almost too much of we have too much of a gap between who the top elite runners are and the whole rest of the field. Like Boston in the 80s, in 1983, there are almost 100 runners broke 2 hours and 20 minutes.
Right.
You don't see that now. And that kind of lack of depth is hurting our overall uh, athletics program in marathoning. It
Mhm.
doesn't really appear that way because we've won some Olympic medals uh, in more recent history.
Right.
But the Olympic marathon is a little bit watered down because you're only represented 3 people from each country representing. Not
Yeah.
to say that Americans didn't do a great job, they did. Um, but anyway,
I
yeah,
agree.
there's been a lot of change, that's for sure, since the 70s.
So, I mean, you went from your first one to your second one in 2 years. I mean, running in the 220s is at a high level, but to get to 212 is
Right.
that's a
Well,
dream for most people.
my performances at other distances, 20 kilometers. Half marathon wasn't such a common race in the mid to late 70s. It became
Mhm.
more popular later. But my performances against other top athletes who had run 215, 213,
Mhm.
and because I did workouts with Bill Rodgers, Randy Thomas, Greg Meyer, um, and I was holding my own with those guys,
Mhm.
occasionally beating them, uh, then I knew that if they were running 214, 213, then I should be shooting for that as a goal as well. So it gave
Right.
me a lot of confidence. And
What were
that's where that group dynamic and the whole club thing was so important. And you
what do
guys
you,
have that with your support group.
yeah,
Um, you can see that it's it helps get you motivated to get out there.
mhm.
Having contact with all these other people that are obsessed with the same thing that you are.
That's essentially why we exist, because
Right,
we're
exactly.
the only people that get each other.
And that's what our little club was then. I mean, running was only just taking off in terms of being a boom period.
Right.
When I started, the boom was yet to happen, and Frank Shorter had just won the gold medal in Munich, uh,
Yep.
and all that series of events that led to Boston. The growth at Boston from my first one, even to my last one, was in 1986. In those 10 years was phenomenal.
Yeah. I mean, when you were living through it, did you realize, like, if you looked around, like, you were like part of history, and like the people that you were running with and
Yeah,
yourself, it's like this is now
yeah,
what
not
everybody's
really.
talking about. Yeah.
Not really, no. No, you have to look back, I think. I mean, finishing third at Boston was such a big deal. That really
Yep.
it really kind of justified for myself. People had tolerated my obsession with running and the fact that I worked in a job that allowed me to run, allowed me
Right.
time off to go to compete in races all over the world.
Mhm.
Um, but when your neighbors see you every day out running a couple of times a day, and they just think you're crazy until they see, oh wow, at least he's very good at it. He finished third at Boston Marathon.
Right.
But things have changed today because there's so many runners, and everyone is accustomed to seeing that.
Right.
Hmm.
What would a typical like workout look like with you guys under Billy? Like to go from a 220 to a 212, what would a week's worth of workout look like?
At that time, my sweet spot was about 100 miles a week. Um,
Okay.
the winter before the 79 Boston, I had an injury that slowed me for a couple of weeks, a knee injury.
Hmm.
And, I was really pointing for Boston. Everything had been going so well, and then I got this injury. So my training was lessened to half what it normally was for a few weeks. And I
Okay.
actually changed the workouts that I was doing because I had a lot of trouble. We used to run on the track once or twice a week. We do our interval workouts.
Hmm.
And so I just started doing workouts on the marathon course. And I'd do a tempo run. You can call it a tempo run back then, but I would do a run where I would just work all the hills. And I did it every week, and could be either a 10 or a 12 miler. Um, so that workout was kind of key. And I did it usually alone.
Okay.
And I'd run the 5 miles from the fire station in Newton around the reservoir in Cleveland Circle back to Boston College.
Okay.
And sometimes I'd be running, 5-minute pace for that 5 miles. And that was in the midst of a 10 to 12 miler. So whatever I did, it worked out. And like I say, the people I was training with and racing against, I was holding my own. So it gave me the confidence that I could do it. So
Yeah.
I wasn't too intimidated to go out with that lead group, even though in that group was Frank Shorter, Bill Rodgers, Seiko from Japan, some of the top Finns, top Americans, Don Cardall. It was a great field, and it was a big surprise, but at the same time, I was ready for it. So preparation was the key.
That turn that you're talking about by the firehouse in Newton, like that's the toughest part of the course right there until you get to Boston College. And
exactly.
For the people that haven't run it, you
funny
make that
because
turn and you're in trouble.
I didn't get out to Hopkinton that often, so I wasn't as familiar with the first 10 miles. But from Natick in, I was very familiar because I trained there a lot.
Right.
Yeah. And
that 5-6 mile stretch it's all the hills. That's all the uphills, at least.
It is.
On the course.
Yeah. And just as key as the downhill too. But two of my Bostons, I dropped out at the same place at Lake Street, which is approximately 21 miles. And both years were on the hot side. And I just got dehydrated and dropped out there. But the marathon's been tough. I've run over 30 marathons, and I've probably run 5 good ones. Most of them have been a mixed bag or terrible. But I still have those 5 good ones, and I'm happy with that.
Well, I don't know how many people realize too, like there weren't water tables, and if it was hot, there was no tables or anything out there. There's no support, no goo stations or anything like that. You were on your own once you started.
Yeah, my first Boston was 1977. Jerome Drayton won that year, and that was a warm year. And the headlines in the newspaper the next day were really funny because Drayton was very critical of the fact that Bill Rodgers might have his wife out there or other people with drinks, and there was no drink stations. He also criticized the fact that there was no timing. Boston had traditional checkpoints, which I have a map of the traditional checkpoints in my book because I thought it might be of interest to people to see. And they were all over the place, 17 3/4 miles at the fire station, at Framingham, 7.3 or whatever it was. And they'd have a little sign right there. But these markers went back to 1890s, So that was something that had to be changed. I mean, people want to know what their mile splits are. We knew where a lot of them were because we trained on the course. Right. But Drayton's criticism, he wasn't wrong. But it was just usually when you win, you're not sitting there at the press conference talking about how terrible the race was and criticizing everybody. But he wasn't in a good mood. And he was accustomed, he had won in Japan, the Fukuoka Marathon. And the Japanese, they did everything by the book. So they would have everything, every kilometer. The course was out and back around a cone. It was all by the IAAF rules for a marathon running. When Boston was brought, became an event, that none of these rules even existed. So, they were one of the few marathons in the world. You had the Olympic marathon. Next year, Boston starts their own. So, it was you're talking about the very beginnings of marathon running there.
Right.
So, but Drayton was right, and eventually the BAA got the idea, and they improved on those things. Not right away, like everything else with the BAA in that era. It took them a while to get get with the program, but they did.
They figured it out.
I think the BAA historically always said, we have a great race here. If you want to run. If you don't, then go run somewhere else. But eventually that came to a head in 1986 when I ran my last one. That was the first year that Hancock was involved, and they had prize money because it was losing its luster. And, I think it was for the good. Obviously, things changed. So,
we have Rob Di Castello won it that year from Australia.
Rob Di Castello ran such a phenomenal race. I ran that race. I finished in 6th place. But Rob was in his own race because he ran 2:07 and I ran 2:14. So he was already showered and probably, having a cold one by the time I got there. But it was still a great race for me.
Yep.
It was I finished just behind Arturo Barrios was 5th, He wasn't a big star then, but he later went on and set the world on fire, set some world records and everything. And then Bill Rodgers was fourth. So I was the second American that year. But Rob's race was phenomenal. And what he said afterwards, and you can talk to him about this when you speak with him, but he said he had seen Steve Jones go very fast a first half in Chicago, where Steve went on and ran low 101, 102 first half. And he said, I want to try running a marathon that way. And so he went out very hard at Boston and virtually ran alone the second half of the race.
Yeah.
So, just a tremendous effort. 2:07 in 1986 was a fast time.
Yeah. He'll be on the show on Wednesday night at 7:00.
Yeah.
So,
I think he was in Boston last year or the year before. He has a group of Aboriginal runners.
Yep.
So I'm sure he'll talk about that. But there's a film that I've seen that he made with him working with these runners. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, he's going to be talking about that marathon project on the show.
Yeah.
Because he's had a few of his runners in the marathon itself.
I never met him personally, but he just seems like a really great guy. Yeah.
Definitely. And then you brought up Japan a little bit. Now you won a marathon in 1982 there, right?
I did. I was fortunate. I won a race in Beppu. That's on the southern island of Japan in Kyushu. And I actually just exchanged an email with someone in Japan just this morning, Brett Larner. He does Japanese running news, Japan running news, excuse me.
He's Yuki's agent, right?
Yeah, he's kind of recycling things because normally he's everything Japan. Japan has phenomenal athletics program with marathon running, and he covers the sport very closely over there. And right now, of course, he's looking for material for his blog. Okay. So I had written something for him on that 1982 victory I had, and it's actually on YouTube. You can watch the entire race on YouTube. So he was going to recycle that story that I did a few years ago. And it's to win a marathon in Japan is you feel like a big time athlete because they revere the marathon. And I won the race by 7 seconds, so it was a very close race.
Wow.
So it was kind of a dramatic finish. And I'm still one of the few Americans that has won a marathon there. So Shorter's won at Fukuoka. Rodgers has won at Fukuoka. And there's been a few other victories by American men, but they were back a long time ago. And they were not what would be considered a major race over there.
Right.
Yeah. So it was a big thrill. And obviously write about it in my book.
Right. Do you have to?
If you ever want to watch it, it is available on YouTube.
Did you take a different training regimen or anything for a marathon in Japan? Like, was there anything that you would do different?
No, but I had run in Japan twice before, so I was more familiar with the experience of running there. Although the Japanese are very respectful of the marathon, and it's like I said, all the races there are nationally televised, and the news media, they greeted us at the airport. When we get off the plane, the news people were there to interview us right at the airport. And every day there was media coverage of the race. And it can be a little, they want to take you on tours. They want to take you to cultural hotspots. And before the race, you really don't want to do any of that. You just want to rest and get your running in. Because you've had a long journey, but you don't want to offend your host. So you're always kind of, tiptoeing around. But I had learned from past experience. So when I got there, I tried to hide out in my hotel room, and they come and knock on the door and say, Haji-san, we got the course tour. And I try to, hide in my room because you never saw the Japanese runners on the course tour. They were home resting where you should be.
Right.
But every experience there was great, especially getting a victory. I had a 5th place finish at Fukuoka the same year, where I ran 2:11. So, and I was first American there
Wow.
in 1982. So, yeah, had some great experiences there.
Wow. So we have a quick question from the audience here. So Natalie
Sure.
Dorset, she's interested in your parents. She says, did your parents object when you left college to focus on running? Did they influence your decision to go back and complete your degree?
Uh, yeah, my dad, and I think I kind of point this out in the book that
Yep.
he wasn't happy.
Right.
Back in the 70s, I graduated high school in 1973. So it wasn't, I would say it was closer to 50-50 among my friends. Some went on to learn a trade, or they got jobs in factories. Lowell, where I grew up, is a mill town, although it was pretty much on the skids in the 1970s, and there wasn't exactly a lot of jobs available.
Mhm.
But there were some, so not everyone went to college. And I really was on the fence whether I was going to go to college or not. I never had the rigor in high school. I was one of the top cross country runners in the state, Massachusetts. I finished fourth in the state meet, but I only got a few college offers, and it was mainly because I didn't do well in the SAT. My grades weren't that good. I did just enough to get by. I can't really tell you why. It was just an attitude that I had.
Right.
So it wasn't that I wasn't interested in learning because I was always a reader. That's why probably I became a librarian later in life.
Mhm.
But at the time, athletics was the one thing that was kind of keeping me on the right road. And but yeah, I went to Johnson and Wales Junior College on an athletic scholarship. And
Okay.
after a year, when I left, yeah, my dad was not happy. He came down to Providence to pick me up, and but he didn't. He wasn't. It wasn't his personality to get down on me. He helped me find a job, and I worked for a year. And working, you know, I learned a lot from working for a year. I learned that going back to college wouldn't be a bad idea. And actually, my supervisor of the job I had pulled me over one day, and I was 19 years old, and he said, "What are you doing here? I mean, you really want to be in this job, for the next 40 years? Why don't you go back to school?"
Yeah.
So I did. And really, honestly, my motivation for going back to school as well was running, because it was a path to get back into athletics, and I missed it. When I
Yeah.
wasn't running, I had a few injuries, and I got disappointed, I got despondent, and I started to question whether running was really something I wanted to do.
Mhm.
I had to fall in with a group like Greater Boston and a coach like Bill Squires and, athletes like Bill Rodgers to pull
Mhm.
me in. I had to have that. It's hard to do it on your own. I
Yeah.
don't know whether I would have had the success as a runner, even the modicum of success I had, if it weren't for that group.
Yeah.
So, things happen in life. Yeah. I had a checkered college career, but eventually I got my undergraduate, and
Okay.
later I got my master's in library science. So I got it. I just followed a different path than the norm.
There's no right or wrong path. There's just a path.
That's what
That's
I
all.
think too. I don't
Yeah.
think everyone should necessarily have to go to college right after high school.
Yep.
As long as you have some sort of plan, I think
I agree. I agree.
that's helpful.
I have one in college and one senior in high school. So yeah, I'm having those conversations now.
Yeah, yeah, and it really just depends where your heart is. Like, what do you want to do? I
Yeah.
always had this athletics thing, and I just didn't know how to accomplish anything through athletics. There's no profession there. You could
Right.
sort of make a living. You could get sponsored. There was under the table money all in the QT,
Hmm.
but that's a difficult way to try to make a living.
Right.
I had a job in an athletic store in the early 70s. Not every retail store would sell running shoes. You,
Hmm.
you couldn't buy a pair of Nikes anywhere except some of these specialty stores. So they started cropping up everywhere.
Hmm.
And I got recruited to work in one called the Runnery on the South Shore of Hanover, Massachusetts. Bill Rodgers opened up his store around that same time, 77. in
Mhm.
Cleveland Circle. And it was a good fit for me. They understood my running obsession, and they allowed me time off on weekends if I had to go out of town, out of state for a race.
Mhm.
But I put in a lot of hours there. I also sold shoes there. We started a resoling of shoes operation.
Oh, wow.
So that was really became my primary job. And I did it with really rudimentary things that a cobbler would use. A
Mhm.
cobbler basically showed me how to do it. And there were certain types of shoes that were very simple to resole. And back then we had cushiony material. The only issue was it would wear out the Vibram sole that was so soft.
Yep.
So they were easy to resole. So people would come in and pay us, a decent, it made it worth our while. So that's how I survived with my running. It wasn't exactly career track. It could have been maybe
Right.
to be in the retail business. That's not the path I chose to go on, but
Okay.
it worked out. I was fortunate in a lot of ways. I think you can see that in the book that things kind of fell together,
Yep.
not necessarily. And when I say people need to have a plan, I certainly didn't have a very solid one. I just followed. I was more of a work off my emotions person as
Right.
opposed to having a solid idea and just following that. I just went by what felt right.
Well, one of the ideas you had, which I think a lot of people have, is to go across the country and do a cross-country trip.
Yeah. Well, my hometown is the hometown of Jack Kerouac.
Mhm.
I don't know if you're familiar with him. He
Not
wrote a
no.
book called On the Road,
Okay.
and a famous novel. Anyway, I guess I got some wanderlust from him because I was on a hiking trip in New Hampshire's White Mountains, and I met some older guys, and I told them I was from Lowell, and they said, "Have you read Jack Kerouac?" I said, "No." And Jack Kerouac was kind of out of favor then. He had passed away in 1969. And Lowell had never really claimed him as a favorite son at that point, and a lot of his books were out of print. These guys said, "Well, you got to try and read Jack Kerouac." So I did, and I was really caught up in just the fever pitch of the stories, and
Mhm.
the fact that he ran track at my high school, Lowell High School. He was a sprinter and a football hero, and my coach in high school was good friends with him.
Mhm.
So it was just, I guess, the traveling across the country thing, the cutting loose was just, again, not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, just needing time to figure things out,
Mhm.
not being happy in my college degree program.
Right.
Um, I always knew that if I wanted to run, there were outlets for that. I started to learn. I had already started running with the Greater Boston Track Club. Um, so I just had to decide, and I did. It took me a while, but I did come to the decision that no matter what happened over the next few years, I was going to devote my time to running.
Uh-huh.
Because you only have a short span of years when you're younger to see how good you could be, and even when I ran a 2:12, I was the seventh rated runner, ranked runner in the country by Track and Field News. I had to go and try to make the Olympic team. I mean, I had a shot. If you have any kind of shot, then you want to do it. But what you
Right.
need to do to make that team is, I don't consider it a sacrifice. I consider it, living life large to do what I want to do.
Mhm.
But you have to find a way. And
Right.
sometimes it can be tough to find a way. And a lot of that is what I'm trying to write about here.
Mhm.
That was my passion. Uh, and I think it's still a struggle for young athletes today. But
Yeah.
but everything has evolved and changed. So
We have
yeah.
another question from the audience here. Gary McNamee. Gary McNamee, he's the owner of the Outside
Oh,
Interactive.
Gary. Hi,
Yeah.
Gary.
Hey, Gary. Gary actually introduced me and you. So thank you,
That's
Gary, for
right.
getting us
That's right.
together. He's got a great app where basically you can download the app and run on a treadmill. You can run the courses, like you can run Boston, you can run different courses throughout the country, even the world.
Right.
And the treadmill will adjust what the elevation is based off
Yeah.
of where you're on the course, but also
Wow.
it shows you the scenery, like the actual course footage as you run. And it
Nice.
adjusts with your speed. It's really cool
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah.
He wants to know, he says, ask Bob about the Gurney Classic race. I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Oh, the beach race? The beach race?
Gurnet?
Yeah.
Or Gurney?
So Gurnet is a name of
Gurney.
it's a name of a strip of beach in Duxbury, Massachusetts.
Okay.
And the Greater Boston Track Club, Jack McDonald, who was one of the founders of Greater Boston Track Club, he had a summer place down in Duxbury. So he started this it was supposed to be a 6-mile race on the beach.
Mhm.
So they would have the race. They'd figure out when the low tide was going to be.
Mhm.
And you ran on the beach. You ran 3 miles out, turned around and came back. And it became a very popular race down in Duxbury. So we used to run it just as a workout, and it was mostly Greater Boston guys.
Okay.
And then if any money was raised, it would go into Greater Boston's kitty. And then if we needed money for runners to travel to big national championship races, then the money would be we used to help defray their expenses.
Okay.
And that's how there was another race on the cover of my book. I'm running the Freedom Trail race. That was an 8-mile race in Boston that followed the actual Freedom Trail, that red line you see in downtown Boston, all the
Yep.
historic sites.
Yep. I've done it.
So they started that race. They got sponsorship from Labatt's Beer, and they raised a lot of money, but the money was used to benefit the athletes. So it was a model that worked really well until running changed. So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Okay. And then you also knew Tommy Leonard as well. We were talking a little bit about him before.
Yeah, I met Tommy. First time I met him in 1974. Once you met him once, you didn't forget. But I
Right.
met him through Bill Rodgers and another friend and runner, Vin Fleming. Vinny was
Okay.
5th in the 77 Boston Marathon. So they introduced me to Tommy at a race in Amherst, Massachusetts, a 10-mile, tough 10-mile race. And Tommy said, okay, are you running Boston? He said, you got to run Falmouth. He had started the Falmouth road race the year before.
Mhm.
And you got to come to the Elliott. And, and then I started seeing Tommy all the time. We became really good friends. When I met my wife, one of the first people I took her to meet was Tommy, because I wanted to get his opinion.
Okay.
So what do you think? Is she gonna, I really like this woman. What do you, and he said, he gave me the thumbs up or whatever. But yeah, we've had so many great times with Tommy. Like I said before, he was so good for the sport, probably the best marketing tool that USA Track and Field ever had. And I think anyone you ask about Tommy, that's what you're going to hear.
Yeah.
I went to his wake and funeral service last year, and it was sad, but at the same time, he lived to be 85, and a lot of us didn't think Tommy was going to make it to 85, let alone I went to his 80th birthday, and he had asked, did you think I'd make it to 80? And everyone said no. So.
Well, yeah, he was a great runner in his own right, but then he owned a bar and had a bar.
He wasn't a great competitive runner. He just had all this feeling for running, and he loved runners, and it was contagious. And if you met him, if you walked into the Elliott and you were a runner, once the place got going, he was just so enthusiastic. People wanted to come back. They had a great time. And the place kind of catered to runners, especially all around the different running events in Boston, in particular the Boston Marathon, when there'd be lines outside, people trying to get in. So it was our place. It was our clubhouse. He had Tommy put photos of runners on the wall. He had, marker on the wall that was a world record for the high jump. And he had every top athlete of that era, if they came to Boston for any reason, they would go and see Tommy. And then we had Joe Quintana, a sports writer for the Boston Globe, who covered the sport very well. So it was really a heyday of running in Boston.
The original Cheers of Boston.
That's right. That's right. For runners, the runners' cheers.
There you go. So Gary's got another question. I don't know if you can answer this one. Let's see. He says,
tell him he's limited to 3 questions. Just kidding.
Ask Bob if he, Bill, and the other Greater Boston Track Club guys from the 70s ran today, how they would compete against the East Africans of today.
Yeah, that's a tough one. Tough to say because,
Yeah.
you know, the sport progresses. Obviously, there weren't as many or anywhere near as many East Africans competing back then. Although Abibe Bikile and Mamawoli competed in Boston in 1963. So there were some. But with the dynamics of the sport, the economics of it, it's hard for Americans to compete. And I'm not saying like if there's 100 people who run, or more than 100 that run under 210 for the marathon, and say 60, 70 of them are all from Ethiopia or from Kenya, and others are dispersed among other countries, but the United States only has maybe 3 or 4. I think we should have much more than that, and we can, you know. But it's like I tried to point out before, there isn't a good support. There are some groups in the country, the ZAP group down in North Carolina, the Hansons in Michigan. Mm-hmm. There was some groups on the West Coast, but there's just not enough. There's not enough. So in terms of how I would compete the same way I always did. But when I was a younger man, I was more of a suicidal type. You know, I used to go out and just run with the leaders. It didn't matter. And then I had to learn through experience the sport. But I think as the world record progressed, you set your goals higher. So when I was running, the world record was 2:08. My personal best was 2:10. So I was only, 2 to 3 minutes from the world record.
Right.
And yeah, it's a tough question to answer. The only way that I can answer it is to say that I would compete the same way. But I think my expectations would be higher because the sport progresses and you set your goals higher. So that's just how it is. It's a mental, the psychology of the sport is as big, if not bigger, than the physical, what workouts you do, how hard you train. All of that is pretty much the same. You can only train so hard. There are some innovations. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there are also performance-enhancing drugs in sport and a lot of other issues. So, yeah.
It's hard to compare times, obviously. That's like comparing, they always try and compare the great basketball teams of the 80s to the teams of 2000 and stuff. And it's just, there's no answer.
It's very interesting that the 2-hour mark was broken, but it has nothing to do with competitive running. I mean, I'd much rather see a competitive race. I was watching the London Marathon yesterday because on the Olympic Channel, they're rebroadcasting old races. And I could see all the pacers out there. And it takes a little bit away because what they did was the marathon back in the day, of course, like Boston, that wasn't really designed for speed. It can be a fast course, but the people who designed it kind of designed it after the marathon in Athens. They tried to find a similar terrain to that. Now they made the marathon like a track event. It's all about making the course as fast as possible. And you just go out and and it's completely flat and you have pacers. Some racers are starting to rethink that, especially in New York, because their course is not necessarily fast, not compared to Chicago or Berlin or London. But in Chicago, I believe that they also do no longer have pace setters. And then, well, I just think that's a big change when you're so focused on time.
Right.
Everyone wants to know who the world record holder is. There actually used to not be a world record. It used to just be a world best, so that because marathon courses were so different.
Right.
But then they kind of tried to standardize everything. In the 70s, if you ran a road race, most of the time, the course wasn't certified or anything. They just said, you run from this pub to this pub and it's 7.3 miles. Okay, nobody cared. I mean, there was a course record, but you didn't compare it with other courses. There was a course record and that was that. Nobody cared about the time. It was a competitive thing. If you want to run fast times, you go on the track. Road racing is a different animal. And, I think we lost a little bit. It is good to standardize, but you can take it a little too far.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah, you can't really compare one course to the other, especially Boston compared to the other majors. There's just no comparison.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just, you're going to run from here to there and nobody. Yeah.
Right. Keep it simple. Go back to the basics. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you also, Yuki Kawuchi, correct?
Yes.
2018.
Yes. I had been a fan of his for a while, even though in the beginning I thought that they got a little carried away with his amateur status. In Japan, though, it's true that if you are amongst the top runners, they all run for corporate teams. And it's a good, big honor to be on a corporate team. You have a job, but your primary job is to be a runner. And the corporate teams compete against each other. So it's a pretty good model. I mean, we could do with a model like that. But Yuki bucked the trend, and Yuki had a full-time job. He's like a school administrator. And, he ran 208 marathon. He made several of Japan's national teams. So, he was a big hero because of that. But he wasn't truly, like in our day, an amateur was someone who took $5, I mean, if you got something for a prize that was worth more than just expense money, you'd be considered a professional.
Right.
I mean, everyone did it under the table, so there's a lot of hypocrisy, So, but Yuki, if he won prize money, he would take it, but he wasn't taking like parents' money to race.
Right.
So it wasn't, but I guess what I'm saying was he wasn't an amateur in the spirit of, what amateurism was really like and how athletes suffered under amateurism. I mean, Boston didn't become a professional race until 1986, and they were the last bastion. But I always loved Yuki. Every time I'd seen an interview with him, it was I loved his attitude, and so I got to know Brett Launer a little bit. I wrote a piece for Japan Running News blog, and when Brett came to Boston, they brought him over the first time without Yuki, and they were trying to get Yuki to come to Boston. So they did it through Brett. So they brought Brett, and he talked to myself, and he talked to Bill Rodgers, and Bill did a little video asking Yuki to come and run the Boston Marathon. And so the next year he did come. And so they invited myself, Jack Fultz, a former winner, Bill Rodgers, and myself, and Brett Launer, and Mary Kate Shea, who's the elite athlete coordinator for John Hancock. So we had a nice dinner, and it was nice to meet Yuki. He ate a really impressive amount of food, I have to say. The next day, he ran a marathon in Marshfield, Massachusetts on New Year's Day.
Oh, yeah.
A marathon there. Ice cold, ridiculous amount of rain and wind and cold. And he was one of two finishers in this marathon. But he broke 2:20. He broke the record that an American, Doug Curtis, had the record, I believe. He broke the record for the number of 2:20, so it was like 70 something sub 2:20 marathons in his career. And of course, he surpassed that by a lot now.
Right.
And then he came and won Boston in atrocious conditions, which was not, that's why when I saw the conditions that morning in 2018, I thought, I think Yuki's got a shot today.
Yeah, those New Year's Day conditions were probably worse for him.
They were way worse.
Yeah.
There's actually some footage out there you can see of him running that thing. And he's running in like a wetsuit that a scuba diver would be wearing. He definitely prepared himself to run in those conditions. But he said even halfway through the race, he was like, why am I doing this?
Right.
He was ready to just stop, and he just kept going.
I often ask myself that question.
Of course. Yeah. If you don't, then you got to worry.
Right. So where can people find your book? It's on Amazon, correct?
It is on Amazon, yeah, and I have copies, have some print copies if people want a signed copy. I hope to do some book events when we're good to go again.
Okay.
If Boston does happen in September, I'll be trying to plan something. My hometown hometown where I grew up in Lowell, Massachusetts, we had planned an event up there at Mark's Running. And so we're still hoping to have that eventually
Okay.
when the time comes. People, well, like I said, they can get it on Amazon. They can try and contact me through Facebook or whatever.
Okay.
Message me, send me your address, and if you would like a signed copy.
That's great. Yeah, it's Tale of the Times by Bob Hodge. It's a runner story.
Yes.
And again, it's short, quick reads, a lot of pictures.
A lot of
It's
pictures.
great.
You
Great.
can also get the Kindle version as well.
Yeah, correct.
So,
All right. Well, Bob, I appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
all right, thank you.
Listening to your anecdotes, and maybe we can have you on again
All right,
and continue the conversation. But thank you so much for your time, and be
all
safe.
right, you're welcome.
And we will
All
talk
right.
to you soon. Bye bye.
All right, bye-bye.